Hello there, my name is Derek DeWinter, co-founder of the DeWinter Group, and today we'll be having a podcast with a couple of my amazing colleagues, the third in our series. I want to first thank Stampley for making this happen. Appreciate that very much. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the DeWinter Group, we are a 21-year-old search firm with about 90 people here in the Bay Area that provides finance, accounting, technology, HR, and board search services, both on a permanent basis as well as a consulting basis. And today I have the really great fortune of having an awesome conversation with two of my favorite people in the world and two leaders that are on our permanent search practice, and that's Andy Dunayczan and Tilleskjor. And I'm going to ask them real quickly just to do a quick intro, and then we'll dive into kind of the big part of our conversation, which is the market we're in, how we're navigating it, what we can do, and all that kind of fun stuff. So maybe Tony, if you can start, a quick hello.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Derek. My name is Tony Tilleskjor. I am a managing director for DeWinter Associates. I've been at the firm for about 6 years, and I've spent almost 10 years in the finance and accounting recruiting space within the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm a Minnesota native. I moved to San Francisco about 10 years ago in 2011. And my background is actually in accounting. I started my career in public accounting in Minneapolis, where I'm originally from, with KPMG, and then I moved out to San Francisco and started in recruiting shortly thereafter.
Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I'm originally also from the Midwest, from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Went to Michigan State, started my career in public accounting, technology consulting, and finance. Mixed in some software sales and found my way to recruiting about 15 years ago. The last 9 of which I've done with the DeWinter Group, and have seen the firm grown immensely during my tenure. I think we were in the 20s in 2012, and now we're over 100. So it's been a great ride.
Awesome. All right, we're going to jump right into things and start talking about this crazy market that we're in right now. So there's a lot that we're going to dive into, but I'm going to start with Tony. And I guess I want to hear from you, since you guys are a little more on the front lines than I am, about kind of the pace of the market, and maybe compare it to markets of yesteryear, or maybe even kind of year over year comparisons. That actually may be slightly unfair, because last year at this time it was an unbelievably radical different market than we've ever seen before. But maybe talk a little bit about kind of some of the things that you're seeing out there on the current pace of the market.
Yeah, I think it's got to be the fastest paced market that I've ever been a part of in my 10 years doing this. I think the San Francisco Bay Area market has always been pretty fast paced. You know, if you compare it to other geographies in the United States, there's just so much innovation here. And I think so many openings and you know, what we do in finance and accounting, that's always been the case. But this year has kind of been a special year. So I think, you know, clients have to be prepared to move quickly in this market. I've seen it time and time again where clients have dragged their feet on candidates, and they've lost out to other companies that have moved quicker on that candidate in their interview process. Or while they're in the interview process, other companies get introduced to that candidate during the interview process, and now they've got many options on the table. So, you know, these companies are all competing for, you know, the same talent pool. So we're seeing more competing offers than I've ever seen before, more turn downs than I've ever seen before. So the pace of the market has just been crazy.
And Andy, on your side, kind of what are some of the top roles that CFOs and VPs of finance are looking to hire these days? And maybe is that any different than in years past?
No, it's totally different. And just to kind of pile on to what Tony was saying, like this is the craziest job market I've ever seen, like hands down. And compared to where we were, you know, 12 months ago, when we were kind of just starting the kind of getting used to the pandemic, you know, about 6 months in, and we were hurting, and now we're as busy as we've ever been. It's extraordinary, and it doesn't make any sense in some ways because we're coming out of this pandemic, but here we are running more jobs than we've ever run and having more success. So it's just crazy. As far as the roles, like we've been more kind of, you know, really equally spread from like the lower level positions, higher level positions in years past. And now it's really top heavy. I think CFOs are looking for 2 primary roles. One is that corporate controller. Like we've never run so many corporate controller searches at one time ever. The second thing that's really highly sought after is that director of SEC and technical accounting. There's so many companies who are going public either through the traditional S1 route or via the SPAC route. And so those two roles seem to be in super high demand over the last 6 months or so.
On your end, Tony, what have you seen? And this is maybe a fairly obvious question, but on the client side, from a remote working or hybrid working situation, what are some of the trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. At the firm, we've kind of split it up into kind of three definitions, right? You have like the fully remote, where companies are open to having somebody work anywhere in the country. Maybe they want to have that person, fly in once a quarter or something like that, but they're okay with that person not coming in on a weekly basis. Then we've got like the hybrid working model, which is, we want somebody in the office 2 or 3 days a week. And then the third one is, we want somebody here full time, right? 4 or 5 days a week, kind of the traditional working model. And that was, pre-pandemic, that was where we saw a majority of clients being in that, like, hey, we want somebody here 4 or 5 days a week. That's pivoted a lot since COVID started. So now, out of our approximately 120 searches we have right now, I'd say 30% of those are fully remote, and 60% are in this kind of flexible hybrid model. So, that's like 90% of our clients are like, hey, we're going to be a lot more flexible with candidates and our employees about where they're working and how they're getting the job done. And I think the pandemic's kind of proven that people can still be really effective working from home. Before it was like, oh, if you're working from home, you're not, really getting the job done. And I think that this has proven that you can still be really effective working at home. And a lot of people prefer having that hybrid model. And I'd say as we've gotten further into the year, we've seen more and more of that transition happening. Maybe in the beginning of the year, we're still in kind of this pandemic era, but I've seen more and more clients be open to kind of the fully remote model. And that could also be partially due to the tight candidate market, where they're saying, hey, look, we may not find this person in the Bay Area like we wanted to, so maybe we have to look somewhere else on the West Coast, maybe Seattle or Oregon, or maybe it's down south in LA. But they're, clients are realizing you might have to expand that pool of candidates because the candidate pool here is relatively tight.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
I was just going to pile on top of that as well. And, candidates want remote work. They want flexibility. Some are cool. Most are cool with 1 or 2 days a week in the office, but more and more of the candidates I talk to, like their number one request is I need to be fully remote. We have clients kind of the old school thinking where like, hey, we want someone in the office 4 to 5 days a week. And like, I think we're cutting our candidate pool in half at least if that's a requirement. So I think it's really a time to be more open to that, in this environment.
Yeah. And I actually have a really good example of that, Derek. I don't know if we're going to get to examples later in the chat here, but I had a candidate that declined an offer last week who she actually preferred this company. It was a biotech company, and I think the offer was better, but they were wanting her to be in the office 4 or 5 days a week. It was in the peninsula. She started looking at, housing in the peninsula, and she's like, oh my God, it's so expensive there. And so she actually ended up taking another offer, which was her second choice, because they were more flexible. And they were saying, hey, you can be mostly remote, maybe come in, once, a couple times a month. But that was her main deciding factor, was how often she has to be in the office, how flexible her employer was. So that's happening in a lot of instances. So to Andy's point, like these companies that are like, hey, you have to be here 4 or 5 days a week, they're going to be losing a lot of top talent.
Yeah, well, it's a sort of an extreme version of what we dealt with before, which is the commute. I mean, commute was a really gating factor in terms of where people were willing to go. And so this is just a more complicated version of the same decisions that candidates were having to go through in terms of, I'm not going to commute from Pleasanton to San Mateo, for instance, or that's an undoable type of situation. So, it's kind of crazy. Hey, I kind of want to sort of a different tangent. How would you characterize your jobs today as compared to 5 years ago or 10 years ago? So I'll go 5 and 10 because, Tony, you're a younger buck than Andy and I. But so 5 years ago, easier, harder? Talk maybe about some of the differences.
Yeah, I'd say in a lot of ways it's easier. I think the more robust job market, the more opportunities there are for us to work with various clients, and honestly to be more selective about who we're working with. I think it's partially a function of how busy the market is, that it's a little bit easier, but also our team has grown. Andy mentioned earlier that when he started, the company was around 20 people. I think we're probably around 100 right now. And we've just got a lot of people in the firm and our team that have been in the San Francisco Bay Area market for a long time. And they've just built really good connections and a really good network. So that tends to make the job of recruiting easier. You just know more people. I think the difficult part of it is just balancing everything, right? We have so many searches that sometimes we're probably working on too many at some points in time. So it's like, how do you manage your time effectively? Where should I be concentrating more of my efforts on certain searches than others? So I think that's the challenging part in a very robust market, is just almost being too busy. But I'd take that over last year where we didn't have enough, or it was a really tough market. You know what I mean?
And what about you, Andy? Rewind 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. I'm gonna go back even a little further. When I started my recruiting career, it was like 2007 to 2009, and the recession, and there was not a lot of jobs to work on. So it was the antithesis of this. There was a lot of candidates, really good candidates, looking for work, and not a lot of good openings. And clients got to be, rightfully so, super picky about who they wanted. And they had their wish list of 10, and they wanted 10 out of 10. And in most cases, they got it because there was so many candidates to choose from. And now flip that on its head, and we've got so many jobs, and so many candidates have already made moves in the last year, in the last 6 months. People have moved out of state during the pandemic. They only want fully remote. And so that candidate pool has really shrunken. So it's really, it's a great time for candidates to be looking. It's a difficult time for employers to hire, and they have to be a little more open and look more about, kind of aptitude versus experience. And they're not going to get their 10 out of 10 wish list in this kind of market. And it's just a totally different time.
Yeah, it is. I use the term wackadoodle. It's not a really technical term, but it seems wackadoodle.
Yeah. And Derek, you've been recruiting a little bit longer than 10 years. Like what's your opinion
a little
on
bit
this market?
Yeah. It's funny. I've been recruiting over half of my life, which I don't know, that sounds good and bad at the same time. I did go back, there's a handful of things that I think are very different from, say, 20 years ago. 20 years ago was 2001. We were just coming off of kind of a .com boom. And I think the significant differences in terms of recruiting between now and then are, the real obvious one is just information. Like, access to information is extraordinary now. If I want to know who the chief accounting officer is of XYZ company, I can find that out in about 12 seconds. That was not something I could have done back in 2001. That could have been a week-long project of who do you know here, who do you know there, picking up the phone, making phone calls. Just that access to information, I think, is radically different. And it was around kind of the same time also, too, that recruiting teams and talent organizations started to be popular. I mean, back in 1994 and 5 and 6 and 7, when I first started recruiting, you didn't really have internal recruiting teams and organizations. And, right around 2001 or that time period is when those organizations started to get built up, which created a little bit more tension, between us and the clients that we were working with. I think it's actually incredibly healthy, and those organizations have gotten really, really big these days with almost every company. In fact, anecdotally, I thought I heard the other day, in fact, I didn't know, I did hear that there were supposedly more recruiter openings in the world than there were engineer openings.
Wow.
LinkedIn study. I'm plugging LinkedIn. Thank you. And I think the other kind of severe difference between 2001 and now is kind of this wealth creation that's happened at companies. Not a lot of people know this, but back in 2001, the NASDAQ composite index was at like 2,000. Today it's at 15,000. Apple was a $7 billion market cap company. Today they're 2.7 trillion market cap, and the same is true with Amazon. They were a $4 billion market cap company. Today, they're close to 2 trillion. So you have this incredible wealth accumulation right around the same time companies started transitioning from stock options to RSUs. And so you have a captive audience of candidates today that are in this marketplace with the highest levels of valuations that we've ever seen that are simply off limits. So your candidate pool, which was the size of a pizza, you start pulling slices away from that of people that have moved out of town or people who work at Google, Salesforce, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, you name it. Those are not candidates that we get to put into the system right now. And so the disparity, or the differentiation there in terms of kind of the embedded wealth that people are kind of getting at these companies is really amazing and very, very different from when I first started recruiting, where you could have gotten a stock option at the right time or the wrong time. And if you got it at the right time, you were locked in. If you got it at the wrong time, you were as free as a bird to go looking around. So it made people a little bit more portable, I think, back then than they are now, for instance. So, well, we talked about it a little bit, like instead of focusing on kind of what's going on with the client side, are you guys hearing anything specific on the client or on the candidate side of things? Again, you talked about that a little bit, both of you, but is there anything very specific that you're hearing that's a little bit different than in, days gone by?
I mean, aside from people want remote work, that's the primary one, but salaries have gone up a ton, in the last year. And I think that, at all levels, really, like we're seeing offers go out that we didn't see in years past for Series B, Series C companies. And even like public accounting, I think they're trying to retain their talent. So I heard that they offered, seniors like a 30K raise. And so those seniors want that typical bump when they leave public accounting. So it's just kind of been both from the top and from the bottom, like both those salaries have been going up.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I think there's a couple other things. Derek, you talked about some of the the big players in the valley and being tied to their stock. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing more, especially for pre-IPO company or candidates interviewing at pre-IPO companies, is just a little bit more clarity around like equity discussion. What does it mean? What's the value of it? How can they compare that to what else is out there in the market? And especially when those types of companies are trying to recruit somebody that's at a publicly held company and they're getting RSUs, there needs to be as much clarity as possible in the equity discussion about those stock options. So that's one thing that I'm hearing a lot of, especially for kind of your mid to upper level people, where that becomes more and more important. And I think the other thing in this kind of environment is providing candidates with a great interview experience. And a lot of candidates are interviewing remotely, they're interviewing over Zoom. And so how do you differentiate yourself in the interview process from other companies that are also interviewing that candidate, which they're no doubt going to be, interviewing at multiple places. And so, just providing them with, quick feedback and following up on the next step and just a great overall experience, because ultimately you have 3-4 hours with somebody and you're trying to they're trying to make a decision on you and you're trying to make a decision on them. So I think that's really important in this era that we're in right now.
Yeah. Also, on top of that, like it's so much easier to interview now. Like you don't have to take a day off of work or call in sick and travel and go to the office. Like you can interview from your home and during working hours, and it's pretty easy. So, I think candidates are more open to interviewing than they were in the past because it's a little bit easier. And that, there's a dual-edged sword to that, because then some people are like, well, I'm just going to try to, interview as much as possible, collect as many offers as possible. So it's, instead of candidates really focusing in on, one or two things, they're looking at 4 or 5 things. So.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where our job comes into play, right? We need to be checking in with those candidates and saying, hey, how many other things are you interviewing for? Where does this stack up with the other companies that you're interviewing with? What's your interest level? If you're not interested, like, let's pull out. We don't want to keep, wasting your time and the client's time. That's always been true. But I think to Andy's point, it's been more true now than ever because of the ease of interviewing.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's so easy to jump on a call, and it's so easy to jump on another call, and it's so easy to jump on another call. I think that the amount of waste in the interview processes, both on the client and candidate side, although really kind of on the client side is extraordinarily high. And so I think our check-ins need to be that much more detailed. And I think that helps you. I mean, the good part about the DeWinter Group, and as I give us a plug, is we've all been working together for a long time. And we generally know the candidates that we've placed for more than just a LinkedIn introduction. These are folks that we met for lunch or coffee 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago. And I think that helps to kind of provide clients a little bit more legitimate clarity about, the resoluteness of a candidate to the best that we can. But I find myself talking to clients about that a lot, that like we actually have met these people. It's not just a Zoom call. In some cases it is, right, if they're new. But like in a lot of cases, and really in most, these are folks we have lots of great stories to talk about. So speaking of stories, as we kind of get close to wrapping this up, any kind of fun, crazy, off the wall thing that you saw this year that like, I never thought I would see this? Story time to maybe make somebody who's watching this feel better about themselves?
Well, it's interesting. Like, as a firm, we've never made as many placements as we've made this year. It's just astonishing. We've also never had as many offers turned down. I mean, there's just that level of movement in the market right now, and people getting multiple offers, 4, 5, 6. I've heard a person getting 7 offers at the same time. It's astonishing. One fun little story is, we had an offer turned down, and I told the candidate, because she was really kind of on the fence. I go, well, hey, if things don't work out with this other company, let me know. And I've really never said that before to a candidate, and it just felt like the right thing to say, because it really felt like the right fit with the company she was turning down. And a month later, she called me and she's like, Andy, you said to call if I wasn't happy, and I made the wrong move. And normally, I think in other markets, a CFO would not want to re-engage with someone who turned them down. But in this market, he was like, absolutely. And we all of a sudden turned that one around and had a new offer out within a day.
That's a great
was the
story.
offer higher or lower than it was before?
Same offer.
Okay, good. I was hoping that was
Good.
the answer. Like,
Yeah. That's a great story. Good for you, Andy, and good for your client.
Yeah, no, to be open to that, because normally, like, it's kind of like dating. Like if you get shunned or your phone calls aren't answered for a month, like you don't want anything to do with this person.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the ego gets bruised.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned this, 7 offer situation, Andy, and I don't know if Derek was going to bring it up too, but that was actually a candidate that I was dealing with directly for one of my clients, and he had a plethora of offers, obviously, ranging from public companies to pre-IPOs, and the thing is he was a controller, right? It wasn't like he was a senior accountant where there's tons and tons of senior accountant openings. He was a controller, so I think, kind of circling back to Andy's point in the beginning of this conversation of what we're seeing a lot of searches, it's controllers. And this guy happened to be a profile that a lot of people like to go after when they're looking for controllers. He worked at public companies. He had, Big Four background. He also had startup background. So he had like the perfect mix of everything, which everybody wants right now. And it just led to him getting a lot of opportunities on his plate. And so he had 7, and thankfully he ended up going with one of our clients on that one. So, but yeah, I've never seen anything like that for any level, let alone a controller type candidate.
Well, it could never happen, right? Like there could not be a convergence of market opportunities and ability to interview like there has been this past year. You could never have ever had 7 corporate controller or chief accounting officer offers simultaneously. You'd be lucky to have 2.
Yeah.
Right? Like 2 would have been a lot of work. Like, oh my gosh, I'm calling in sick and dentist appointment, this and that. And like, you'd be it would just never happen. Never.
Yeah. I don't know how he got his regular job done during the
Right?
last month. I mean, interviewing, you got multiple rounds of interviews. Like, that's crazy.
Well, I think
Must have
interview
built a
cycles too
really-
have been abridged, right? Like, I think if clients are going to keep up with things, they need to move quickly. And, a typical interview cycle that might have been 4 rounds, I'm guessing is 2 or 3 because you can do it. Or maybe, and I don't know what you guys are seeing, but I think I'm guessing there's probably also lots of team interviews, where you can get on a Zoom call with a couple of people, in 2 different places, and you may not have done typically in an office setting. So I think things are a lot more efficient, but still, that's an astonishing level of efficiency from both sides. For sure.
Yeah.
Well, this podcast is going to go out after they edit out some of our mistakes, particularly mine, probably middle of December. So this will be an opportunity for someone to kind of hear what we've seen over the course of the past year, but also maybe think about what they can do differently in 2022 to get different results from their efforts. So is there anything that you might suggest, as you look into a crystal ball, not necessarily predicting what 2022 is going to be like, although I think it's going to be pretty darn similar, but is there anything that you would kind of give as a suggestion to a client or candidate in the 2022 year?
Yeah, I think, Tony brought this up earlier, but creating a really great candidate experience, and it's really hard to do 2-dimensionally. It's easier 3-dimensionally when you're in an office and you're meeting tons of people, but how do you really set yourself apart as a great place to work? And how do you really get that culture across in this 2-dimensional world we're living in? And, it's a challenge, but I think some companies are doing a really great job about it because they're talking about their cultures on their website and their values, and they're listed in the job description, and they walk the walk, and people talk about that during the interviews. And I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah. And I think on the candidate side, it's asking more questions about culture so that they can really make sure that they're making the right move. I mean, going back to Andy's candidate that came back to him a month later, I mean, maybe it was just something that she missed in the interview process in terms of the company culture because she was interviewing 2-dimensionally. She wasn't able to walk into the doors of the office and walk around and see people and is it a quiet environment? Is it a loud environment? What are the people like? And so be thinking about questions that maybe you wouldn't normally ask about culture in a setting where you're actually going into an office to interview, now that you are interviewing remotely. Yeah, it's always tough to predict like what's going to happen next year. I mean, I didn't know, like going into 2021, like 2020 was a really tough year, and it started to improve at the end of 2020. But 2021 has been great, and I hope it kind of continues to go into 2022 as well.
I would put my money on that for sure, and hopefully it'll continue with some maybe reversion to some mean of normalcy. I don't know that it'll be healthy for all of us. Speaking of healthy, I will wish everyone who's been able to participate in this podcast from a listening perspective an amazing holiday season. Among the blessings that I get to count are working with wonderful folks like Andy and Tony and a host of tremendous people here at the DeWinter Group. So if you have any thoughts, questions, want to reach out to any of us, all of our contact information is on the website. And we'll wish you a happy, wonderful, prosperous 2022. Thanks, guys, for joining.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun.
Thank you, Derek.
Take care.